Hey, I'm Josh, CTO at EdTech company Genio and software consultant of almost 20 years. This is Offscript, a podcast where me and James share unfiltered conversations on building, leading, and learning in today's tech world. No bullshit, just honest talk from people doing the work.
Hi, I'm James. I run a digital consultancy making beautiful software, and we have a real focus on AI and IoT.
Awesome. Cheers, James. So we're going to talk about TDD today and how you think that's going to change with this sort of like explosion of AI and how it's going to change how we do TDD.
Yeah, so TDD, for people that don't know, is test-driven development, popularized by Kent Beck, and brilliant book, still pretty timeless in my opinion. But yeah, it's just sort of occurred to me over the past months how important stuff like this is going to be, because I don't know if any of you have been playing around with like Claude Code, which is amazing, and Cursor, obviously. But they're amazing tools at rapid prototyping, like going from idea to quick prototype really quickly. But I think what I'm really keen to see is how that translates to working on active projects with bigger teams. There's more things to trample on. There's lots of different conflicting modules and overlap in how things look. So how do you actually build stuff with these new tools and without pissing off everyone in your team, basically? Um, so my initial thoughts just around there was an issue in Cursor, maybe 6 months ago, where you'd get it to write a new feature and it would completely remove another. That seems to have got a bit better, but there is always a risk as you operate slightly further away from the code that you're going to actually just kibosh someone else's feature or slightly annihilate a little nice touch that someone added if you're not being that hands-on with the code. Now, you should always really be checking all of the code that's being produced, but it is it could just be a little subtle way you call another thing that makes it not work. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of chat to you around what your thoughts were, what you reckon, because yeah, I think TDD is going to make a bit of a comeback, and maybe even BDD, like behavioral driven development, where you're writing the specification in plain English, basically.
Yeah, I think there's sort of long been an argument around the depth and the city of testing, and I think there's definitely certain circles where people are like sack everything off apart from your integration tests, or just have those complete end to ends for really critical journeys, and just making sure that you're not breaking some of those key sort of happy paths, I guess. And yeah, I do wonder whether when it becomes so cheap and easy to write these tests, because ultimately you're describing it in natural language. Yeah, I guess really you are leaning more heavily on the test suite than we may have before, because you're less connected to the specifics of every line of code, right?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, at the moment, I still feel like Playwright is flaky enough where you wouldn't want loads of those.
Yeah.
They're not quite the point where they're sort of self-healing perfectly. But if you see what mobile teams are doing, like Maestro's tool, they've got a self-healing MCP driver that clicks through an app, taps through an app rather, and it can figure out what's wrong with its own script and change it, which to me is absolutely insane. I think that's really cool. But it's only a matter of time before we get there with Playwright, I feel.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we'll just repeat that a bit because Louis is kicking off.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, my dog's going crazy. Yeah, I think the weird thing is, it's it's a sort of mindset thing, isn't it? I think because ultimately you've got to be really comfortable with the fact that the dog is beating off at the door. First of all, you've got to be really comfortable with the fact that you have a crazy dog. But secondly, you've got to be really comfortable with the fact that you're not going to be writing all of these. He's completely fucked this. I'm going to have to cut this out. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
It's so loud. But yeah, well, maybe that stays in the cut. I think it should stay in the edit. Yeah, I think you've got to get comfortable with the fact that you've probably got to scrutinize the test that it is writing to make sure that if you're vibe coding the functionality and vibe coding the tests, there's quite a lot of room for error there, and I think that could be concerning, right?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is, like, writing the initial code was never really the hard part. The hard
Mm,
part was figuring out what do we build? How do we build it in a way where the UX makes sense to people? How do we build it in a way that's scalable? These are all still hard problems that we need to solve. And I think once you've got a big um, production app rolled out, one of the critical things is you don't introduce regressions. So the stuff
mm,
does work that your customers use all the time needs to continue working. And I think a lot of people that move really quickly with AI this year are going to find that they're going to have to pick up these TDD skills. They're going to have to pick up the end-to-end testing skills. They're going to have to actually implement some checks before things go live, because there's going to be lots of like teams who are inexperienced in shipping software, thinking they've built some software
mm,
like runs on my machine level, putting it out there in the world, and then going, ah, fuck, it doesn't work at all. Or like
Yeah.
as soon as the first 100 customers touch it, it starts to fall over, and like, yeah, it it's just not going to have that rigor there, is it?
Yeah, I guess we're seeing from that you'll see a new sort of heightened level of dependency on things like your error tracking, like your test suite, like the things that you'd normally use as a really like key part of the process, but it's almost there to catch you doing something silly. And when you're not really doing a lot of that coding in the first place, I think it becomes a really significant part of like, are we seeing an elevated error rate because of that thing that I vibe coded and put out there and missed a test on, or, you know,
Yeah. Well, I can see a point where like Claude Code and other tools like that, they would almost just do that. Like you obviously seen it with people's cursor rules files. Like they're really spending the time figuring out what makes a good AI workflow. And for a lot of people, it is let's write a test. And
mm,
then the the perfect thing for me on the projects that I've been working on that are quite LLM or ML heavy is just quietly writing the spec in a markdown file, and then the first item is write the test that matches this function signature. I expect this input, this output, and just get the AI to go down and tick things off in your markdown file as it goes through. Because that's how you would do it as a person. You wouldn't just set off, hopefully, just writing code.
yeah,
You have a bit
yeah,
of a plan of where you're going and how you're going to get there. And if you give AI that framing, the
mm,
quality is so much better because you can reason about how it works because you've got the test, see the inputs and outputs, and then you can have it refactor stuff and know that it still works.
mm,
A lot of people are sort of flying blind, and I don't think they realize they're flying blind because they don't know any other way. Like they're going to pick up cursor and go, "Oh wow, I can code now," and
yeah,
and actually they're going to miss out on, because you can't, if you've got a live production app, you can't just change the database schema. You can't change um, all the fields on an object. You can't change how objects relate to each other really easy. You have to have migrations and you have to do all this other stuff. And you need tests around how that migration works. But if you're just building a prototype, yeah, I
mm.
don't give two hoots about adding a field or changing a table name or whatever. And I think we're going to see some really fun, say fun, some really, yeah, bad failures, I guess. Some like crash
yeah.
and style sort of stuff happening this year.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's, I mean, we've seen the sort of early catastrophes from the whole vibe coding thing, where you've seen people just like build apps, chuck them out into the wild, realize that they've got a huge amount of security holes, or they've accidentally published loads of secrets and stuff. But you're right, like there's a more long term threat here, which is that there is so much complexity to maintaining large scale like production apps, as you said, like the transitions between different states and how you do big releases and all these things that become really complex when you've got a lot of users and a higher volume of like requests coming in all the time. I wonder if there's going to just be a new era of tooling that supports those sort of things. Like, it's not hard to imagine, Claude Code sitting on a production box trying to self-heal bugs that they're seeing come through the error tracking service. Right? Really cool, but also quite terrifying at the same time, because it's like, oh, what are the guardrails of which that's operating under?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, yeah, I think there's already some great tools like that can review pull requests and figure out what the impact of that change is going to be, but it's trying to balance moving quickly with moving safely. And every team is going to have a different risk appetite depending on where they are in that sort of journey. But I think the exciting thing for me is, you know, can you actually bring some of this TDD stuff to earlier stages? So not quite prototype stage, but maybe just after, when you're like starting to find product market fit. You've got a few sort of friendlies playing. It's not like super sensitive information. Like, does TDD actually help accelerate that? Because I've got a strong feeling that it would.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? 'Cause, you know, the incredibly overused phrase like "move fast and break things" that used to be with the license of like your team understood, at least if they were moving fast, what they were breaking and what they were and sort of what the what the compromise was. So like, you know, the decision to move faster and increase the velocity and break a few things, it's like a sliding scale, and you as a team figure out where your comfort level is and like what the risks are of that, what, you know, whether you're risking production data or, you know, depends on the industry you're working in of sort of what risk you're willing to accept. If it was like a fintech space, you probably wouldn't be willing to accept, you know, cash loss or something like that. But I think without the human in the loop there so much deciding what the moving fast and breaking things really looks like, it's quite scary.
Yeah, definitely. I think you should ultimately be accountable for any code you commit, and it's on you to have checked it. But whether we can actually get there is a different thing, isn't it? I know definitely with the teams I'm working with, having unit tests and integration tests wrapped around the features that they're working on has really helped. It is really easy to break things. Not because of AI, just in general. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
coding's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the actual act of writing the code has got easier, but the breaking things is still just as easy.
I mean, I've been breaking things long before AI, and I
Yeah.
think I'll get. So I think the challenge is like thinking more deeply about how businesses like mine and yours operate. Where that really lies in terms of liability. You mentioned it just a minute ago, and I think, are we going to see this thing where, like, you know, contracts for you know, employees are going to become more complex because you can't be like, you know, you're liable for what you write and publish into production, but ultimately, like, there's this new sort of actor in the you know, in view now, which is the agents that are acting on your behalf. You know, depending on how far this agentic sort of approach goes, then ultimately you're sort of you're signing off things that it's doing. You're not really like always completely in control. And I wonder if we're going to have a new set of risks where people are just like publishing stuff that's breaking stuff and be like, it wasn't me, it was the agent.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a great little clip about self-driving and how it was. The idea was that the car would just completely take over and the human jumps in when something's going wrong, which is everything that humans are bad at. It's like paying attention, spotting when things are wrong, self-awareness. The humans aren't very good at that sort of
Yeah.
stuff. And they were kind of like going, right, well, we're 80-90% of the way there. We'll just do most of the driving, and then we'll do a bleep, and then the human could just jump in and grab the wheel and take over. And they've had to reframe it, haven't they? Where you're always active, your hands need to be near the steering wheel. You're basically ready. You're in control, but then the AI jumps in when something goes wrong. When someone pulls in front of you, it's apply the brakes and things. That's a much more sensible way around. So how do we take that kind of framing and apply it to agentic coding? Like, how can we make it so that you're doing the careful consideration in a way that works well for humans? So like writing a behavioral driven development spec that lives alongside the code base. That sounds like a sensible thing, because if you're a step removed from the code and you have to spend this mountain of time trying to understand the code that's just been written, to have this is what I intended alongside that feature, I feel would be a really positive step to trying to unmuddy the waters a bit.
That analogy of the self-driving car and like when intervention is required is a really good one. I guess the problem is that if you it could be trying to solve slightly different problems. Like people want self-driving cars because they don't want to be driving everywhere. So it's sort of a cop out to say you sort of always still in control, but if it goes really wrong, we'll try and help. And I think it's understanding where that automation is going to be beneficial, or where it actually delivers on the promise of, like, efficiency, or even just the ability to do, like, multitasking in the case of self-driving cars. Like if I want to eat a donut and drink a beer, then that's probably,
Yeah, probably not safe. But yeah, I think with fixing bugs are obviously a lot low risk. Like in theory, obviously, one changes have, of course, huge impacts in code bases in the past. I think Google Cloud went down the other day because of a one-line config change. But I think like bug fixing is quite difficult, but actually LLMs are getting pretty good at doing that, because they can see, they've been trained on all the bug fixes that have ever happened. So they can, with pretty good accuracy, suggest a plausible looking fix. I think the next step now is like, can we get it to write a test to know that it works, and then be part of that feedback loop so it can see its own outcome. And I think we're very, very close to that. And I think that is only still going to bring BDD and TDD into focus. Because if it looks at the bug ticket, writes the test around it, and then writes the fix and knows that it's passed, the chances of it actually being fixed are going to be way higher.
Yeah, and I think when you see this, like, new breed of tools coming through, like CodeRabbit and like Google's Jules, which is the sort of like go off and do this thing and come back when it's done, and like seeing that approach paired with what you've just discussed is going to be really powerful. I think, where you, as you said, you sort of become an experienced code reviewer, just like signing things off rather than having to do a lot of the detailed work, which I think is actually really powerful. I mean, you mentioned that you had a really productive day the other day, sort of working through a bunch of bugs in a similar fashion, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was lots of front end and sort of deeper logic and app bugs mixed together. But while the AI is working on one of the front end tweaks, you can then be having another agent looking at the more complex one, and you do kind of have to keep switching your attention between them. But in parallel, you'd have like 3 of these going, and you can absolutely motor through them. I mean, you're absolutely exhausted by the end of the day. It's the whole context switching, but it's quite energizing. It feels like you've done a sort of like an all-nighter, but you've been like 50 times more productive. So it's interesting, and people do talk about that sort of cognitive load of, then not only do you have to understand how you've described it, what it's trying to do, you've got to then understand all the code that it's written that you haven't written and you're not close enough to. So is it really, how many kinds of people does that help? I think it's like, it's really good for like the deep experts who, like, we've obviously seen pretty much every way that you can fuck up a code base by now, probably done by our own hand. We know how to sort of spot them and fix them. But if it's sort of like mid and juniors, they're probably going to be using these tools, either not spotting the error or spending so much time reviewing the output as to slowing them down, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess there's that there's the curve of investment where you've got to sort of master the tooling. It's just that the tooling's changed in this instance, and I think I guess the automation doesn't shortcut the experience of seeing patterns of things that you've experienced before or made the mistakes many times before. It's just maybe just the mistakes will become different, and how you recognize those mistakes will be different.
Yeah, I think there's still this sort of gut feel and intuition that you get, like when you're looking at a web app and it just doesn't feel right, like it hasn't auto-focused that dialogue, or you feel like that redirect was a bit weird, stuff flashing in and out. These are things that juniors would ship and go, they wouldn't know any better, but you build up sort of taste and instinct over time, don't you? And like, that, changing all the routes in the app is going to be a problem, because what if some other service consumes those API routes or whatever? And like, you still need to know all the good hygiene around what a good code base looks like. So I wonder how we're going to train this next sort of wave of people that have only ever known AI driven development. It's going
I
to.
think, yeah, I think we touched on it in one of the last episodes around like, these shared skills that will be agnostic of any sort of AI toolchain or language, is that, you can't shortcut understanding system design and good architecture and a lot of the good hygiene that you mentioned, really. I think that has to be part of that foundational knowledge, as an engineer. Because then you, as you said, you'll be aware like, oh, if I change this route, I've got to consider what that's going to have a knock-on effect with and how we transition from one state to another. And yeah, all those things.
What I do have to say about it is, though, that when we first started using Cursor, that sort of reaction of, oh my God, what is it doing? That's awful. Like, you sort of get used to that feeling, and you know that you sort of like almost like directing this sort of drunk genius, like doing what you want. But that feeling has actually been getting less and less. And with Claude Code, I'm now looking at it going, that's actually quite good. That
Yeah.
straight out the gate, and
Yeah.
that's kind of unusual for me. In that, how does that change how we do things? Like, is that?
Mm.
I think it's going to really change software development in a big, big, big way.
Yeah.
And I know that we've been saying this for a while now, but I think eh, just in the last week or so, it sort of feels like it's turned another corner.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think for me, like the get out of jail is like, okay, I've done all this stuff in Claude or Cursor. I jump back into like, into the Git diff of like what's not been committed yet. And I'm like looking at it as a whole, as a set of changes. And I'm like, actually, this really adds up and really makes sense. And I would probably have got here eventually anyway, or in some way or another. But actually, it's the speed of which I've got there and the sort of comfort I have with those changes is definitely getting quicker for me, and it's definitely getting more natural as part of the daily working. So yeah, it's impressive, isn't it? It is impressive.
It is, and with that time saved, I think that's where you invest in TDD, in BDD, because
Yeah,
that's what's going to make you set you apart from just people that are just vibe coding stuff. You want to build a solid, tested product that doesn't break, and you want people's data to be safe. And if you can do those things and iterate quickly, I think you're winning.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks for talking to us about that. Yeah, if you want to learn a bit more about BDD and Cucumber and other stuff, we'll pop that in the show notes. But thanks very much for listening to Off Script. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you find your podcasts. Yeah, see you next time.
Cheers, James. See ya.
Cheers.